Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world where wine spills as freely as the gossip at a modern office party. And gods arrive not with thunderbolts, but with ivy wreaths, goat skins, and a knack for stirring things up. You're stepping into the early days of Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and, because no myth ever knows when to stop, theater. You probably won't survive this if you expect Greek gods to follow a logical career path. They never do, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to help me imagine how wide this little campfire of sleepy history spreads, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love to see where and when you're re-listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk into ancient Greece as if it were late afternoon in some timeless olive grove. The cicadas are buzzing. The hills are dry, the air slightly sticky, and there's that faint scent of grapes fermenting somewhere nearby. It's the kind of place where you might expect a picnic, or, if the myths are correct, a spontaneous divine appearance followed by a parade of drunk followers with drums. Dionysus doesn't exactly do subtle entrances. The stories of how he arrives are tangled. Some say he was born twice, once from Semele, a mortal princess, and then again when Zeus tucked the half-formed baby into his thigh like an organic kangaroo pouch. Historians still argue whether this detail is symbolic of rebirth or just an example of the Greeks trying to one-up each other in the category of weirdest family story. What matters for you tonight is that Dionysus shows up in Greece carrying both his divine credentials and a reputation for chaos. Picture yourself trailing him along dusty goat paths. The god is crowned with ivy, holding a thyrsus staff topped with a pine cone. You'd think a god would prefer lightning or golden chariots, but no. Dionysus looks like a festival vendor who never left the party. Around him swarm satyrs, half-human, half-goat tricksters, and maenads, frenzied women in flowing robes. The drums thump, the pipes wail, and you find yourself swaying even though you swore you weren't going to dance tonight. The mainstream fact here is straightforward. Dionysus's cult introduced ecstatic rituals to Greece, often involving wine, music, and symbolic reenactments of death and rebirth. These ceremonies laid the groundwork for theatrical expression. The quirky tidbit: some ancient sources claim his processions included trained panthers pulling his chariot. Imagine that for a moment. People nervously petting giant cats between gulps of diluted wine, trying to look casual. Historians still argue whether this panther parade was an actual ritual element or simply poetic exaggeration to emphasize the god's wildness. Either way, the image sticks. As you wander with him, you notice how the locals react. Some villages welcome him with open arms and wine cups already half filled. Others panic, fearing that his arrival will upend the social order. You can see why. Imagine if someone showed up at your office insisting everyone drop work and spend the afternoon in a half-drunk trance shouting hymn-like songs. Depending on your boss, this is either the best Friday ever or a pink slip waiting to happen. But Dionysus doesn't care about mortal timetables. His power lies in disruption, the kind that loosens people from rigid roles. Farmers, nobles, shepherds, and servants all join his revels. In a society where hierarchy was usually stricter than a bedtime curfew, the sudden leveling feels shocking and freeing. The first time you witness this, you think, okay, this is fun. But the second or third time, you start noticing how the revels are organized. The dances have patterns, the chants follow rhythms, and the stories being shouted are oddly consistent. Tales of Dionysus's wanderings, his victories over resistance, his divine parentage. It dawns on you. This isn't just chaos. It's proto-theater, rituals rehearsed enough to blur the line between spontaneous worship and scripted performance. Of course, not everything is divine choreography. Someone in the back is clearly offbeat with the drum, And another person has tripped over a wineskin and is now lying in the dirt laughing too hard. But even that slapstick chaos contributes to the atmosphere. It's like watching an ancient improv troupe fueled by grapes and questionable decision-making. You pause and take in the sensory details. The heat of the day cooling as dusk settles, the smoke of torches mixing with the musky scent of animal hides, the echo of laughter bouncing off stone hillsides. You realize you're not just an observer. You've been swept into the procession. And for a moment, it feels like the entire landscape hums with the rhythm of this wandering god. Then, a small debate flickers in your mind, borrowed from scholarly whispers. Were these early Dionysian rituals imported from the East, perhaps Anatolia or even farther? Or did they grow organically in Greece? Historians still argue whether the foreignness of Dionysus was part of his appeal, making him the god of outsiders, or if that was just later Greek storytelling. Either way, as you trail the procession, you feel the sense of a newcomer reshaping old traditions. By the time the drums quiet and the crowd disperses, you're left standing under the stars. Dionysus has wandered on to the next village, leaving you with the faint throb of music in your ears and the unsettling thought that you've just witnessed the seed of something much bigger than a party. You sense the beginnings of theater, though no one here would call it that yet. For now, it's just worship, revelry, and stories told under torchlight. And as you settle onto a stone step to rest, you can't help but smile. You're part of a myth that doesn't fully make sense, led by a god who thrives on contradictions. It's a strange place to begin, but beginnings rarely arrive neatly wrapped. You wake the next morning with a faint ache behind your eyes, as if the echoes of last night's flutes and drums decided to set up camp in your skull. Dionysus's revels are not designed with hangover care in mind, but somehow you're still on your feet, following him further across the dusty countryside. The air smells of fermenting grapes, a little sour, a little sweet, like someone spilled juice and decided not to clean it up for a week. Wine. This is his gift, his calling card, and also his trap. You find yourself holding a cup you don't remember picking up, and you realize the ritual isn't just about drinking. It's about stepping into a different state of being. A sip, and the world softens around the edges. Another sip, and the people you'd usually avoid at the village market suddenly seem like long-lost friends. Too many sips, and well, you're hugging goats and promising them a bright future. The mainstream historical fact here is simple. Wine was central to Dionysian cult practice. It wasn't just refreshment. It symbolized transformation, liberation from the rigid lines of daily life. Festivals dedicated to him, called Dionysia, became some of the most important religious events in Athens, eventually giving birth to formal theatrical competitions. The quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks often mixed their wine with water, sometimes at ratios like 3-to-1 or even 6-to-1. Pure wine was considered barbaric, something only Thracians or reckless party crashers would do. Picture yourself at a modern bar asking for just a splash of water in my Merlot, and watching everyone else recoil. Historians still argue whether the Greeks genuinely feared unwatered wine as strength, or if the dilution was more about pacing themselves during long nights of ritual and song. As you drift through the ritual space, you notice how the wine connects people. A shepherd who usually smells of sheep and grass sits beside a merchant dressed in finer fabrics, and both laugh at the same half-sloshed joke. The line between classes thins, if only temporarily. You lean back and let the sound wash over you, noticing how carefully orchestrated the chaos actually is. The maenads, those frenzied women followers, don't just whirl randomly. They chant in patterns, stamping their feet in sync, their robes snapping like banners. Satyrs crash cymbals together, sending jolts through your tired bones, and every so often, someone breaks into a half-sung myth of the god's birth, his travels, or his triumphs. The myth isn't being read from a scroll. It's being lived out in drunken improvisation, and somehow that makes it stick even more deeply. Here cease where your sleepy sarcasm kicks in. The rituals feel less like religious devotion and more like the after-party of a college theater troupe that never quite sobered up. Everyone is performing, even if they don't know it. That farmer shouting about Dionysus's adventures, he's halfway to being a playwright. That merchant reciting lines with exaggerated hand gestures, he's basically auditioning for a tragic chorus. Without realizing it, the whole village is rehearsing theater under the guise of worship. But wine also has its consequences. You glance around and notice two men arguing loudly about whether Dionysus, as sacred animal, is a goat or a panther. The debate quickly devolves into singing competitions and boasts about who can drink more without falling over. Spoiler alert, neither will win. You watch one of them tumble into a fire pit that thankfully holds nothing but ashes. Another light joke for your tired brain. If there were ever a Yelp review for Dionysian festivals, it would read, atmosphere, 5 stars. Drinks, bottomless. Personal dignity, 0 stars, would lose again. And yet, through the haze, you feel something serious too. You sense the way wine allows stories to blur with reality. A villager describes how Dionysus once wandered into a city disguised as a mortal and was mocked, only to unleash madness on his doubters. The teller waves his cup dramatically, spilling half the liquid on your sandals. Still, you lean in, caught by the power of the tale. You realize this isn't just entertainment. It's teaching. It's memory preservation. Without written scripts, this is how myth survives, passed mouth to ear in a haze of half-drunk exaggeration. The scholarly debates continue to swirl as much as the wine. Some researchers believe these rituals were more controlled than the wild stories suggest, emphasizing order over frenzy. Others argue the frenzy was the point, letting worshippers break free of themselves, even if only for a night. Historians still argue whether what you're seeing is a religious ceremony with wine as a tool, or a giant party with religion as the excuse. Maybe both, maybe neither. You shrug. The wine makes the question feel less urgent. As the night drifts on, you realize something else. The hangovers, the arguments, the singing, they all add texture to the ritual. Without the slight headache tomorrow, the liberation of tonight wouldn't feel as sharp. Without the chaos, the order of the next day would seem unbearable. Dionysus isn't giving you comfort, he's giving you contrast. The fire burns low, and you find yourself lying on the ground, the grass tickling your neck. Above, stars shine hard and cold, refusing to blur like the torches below. You breathe deeply, noticing how the scents of crushed grapes, sweat, and smoke mix into something oddly soothing. And as you close your eyes, you sense that these rituals are already bigger than the sum of their parts. They're rehearsals for something enduring. But for now, you surrender to sleep with one final thought. Dionysus is not just a god of wine. He's a god of transformation. Tonight, that transformation came in the form of blurry laughter and questionable choices. Tomorrow, it might take the shape of theater. You don't know yet, but you can feel it coming, like the slow swell of a song that hasn't reached its chorus. The next time you stir awake, it's not the scent of wine that greets you, but the sound of pipes echoing through a wooded glade. You rub your eyes, trying to convince yourself that last night, S. Hayes hasn't simply followed you into a dream. But there it is. The unmistakable shuffle of hooves on dirt, the faint cackle of laughter that sounds far too gleeful to be human, and the rustle of fabric as a group of women whirl past, robes snapping against the air. You've stumbled, again, into the company of satyrs and maenads, the twin pillars of Dionysus's famously chaotic entourage. Satyrs, with their goat legs and mischievous grins, lounge under trees, raising cups in perpetual toast. Their eyes sparkle with a mix of trickery and invitation, daring you to join in their mischief. Maenads, meanwhile, move like forces of nature. One moment they're twirling in perfect rhythm, hair flying, ivy wreaths falling loose. The next, they're shrieking at the sky, arms raised as if commanding the stars themselves. The mainstream fact here is that satyrs and maenads appear in countless depictions of Dionysian worship, carved into vases, painted onto walls, and described in surviving texts. They represent wildness, the parts of human nature that resist control. The quirky tidbit? Some accounts insist maenads carried thyrsi, staffs tipped with pine cones that supposedly sprouted honey or milk if planted in the ground. Imagine taking one on a camping trip. Don't worry, guys, I brought my magical milk staff. Historians still argue whether these details symbolized fertility and abundance, or if they were creative exaggerations added by poets to spice up the myth. You watch as a satyr offers you a cup, eyes twinkling with a just one sip kind of smile. You hesitate, remembering yesterday's headache, but before you can decline, a maenad swoops in, plucks the cup from his hand, and downs it in one gulp before darting away laughing. You can't help but chuckle. The dynamic between them feels like an ancient sitcom. Satyrs constantly scheming, maenads perpetually outpacing them. Their antics, though, are not just comedy. There's a strange structure hidden in the wildness. The satyrs often parody human behaviors, mocking authority, exaggerating flaws, turning the seriousness of kings and heroes into slapstick. Meanwhile, the maenads embody an energy that borders on terrifying. Their dances look free and chaotic, yet somehow the rhythm keeps circling back, echoing the heartbeat of the crowd. You notice that when villagers join these processions, they don't just mimic satyrs and maenads, they become them. A farmer ties goat skins around his waist, prancing awkwardly until he almost trips. A woman who normally never speaks above a whisper is suddenly shrieking praises to Dionysus, her voice echoing through the hills. You realize that masks are not yet literal, they're lived. People step outside themselves, finding personas in the figures around the god. The humor isn't lost on you, though. One satyr tries to impress the group by balancing a wineskin on his head while prancing in circles. He manages 3 wobbly steps before the skin bursts, soaking him in sticky liquid. The crowd roars with laughter and someone yells, "The gods are pleased with your sacrifice." It's ridiculous, yes, but you also recognize something deeper, the beginnings of comedic performance. The atmosphere thickens with scents of pine and sweat, and the sounds rise to a fever pitch. Drums pound, women shriek, satyrs howl. It should feel overwhelming, but instead it lulls you. The chaos is strangely patterned like waves crashing in rhythm. You sit back, letting it wash over you, thinking this must be how the earliest audiences felt, entranced by something wild yet deeply familiar. Scholarly debates bubble in your mind again. Were these monadic frenzies literal, with participants losing themselves to divine madness, or were they carefully staged rituals designed to appear wild while staying safe? Historians still argue whether the ripping apart animals with bare hands stories were metaphorical or just ancient tabloid exaggerations. You lean toward metaphor. After all, you've seen how easily a story grows teeth after a few cups of watered wine. But whatever the truth, one thing is clear. This pairing of trickster satyrs and ecstatic maenads creates a living performance. Without scripts or curtains, without tickets or rows of seats, they've already stumbled onto theater's 2 faces, comedy and tragedy, laughter and terror. It's messy, yes, but it's also mesmerizing. You catch yourself smiling. A maenad spins past, her robe brushing your shoulder, and you feel the electricity of the moment, the kind that makes your skin prickle. Around you, mortals shed their identities for a night, slipping into roles that let them live larger, freer, stranger, and you realize you are watching humanity rehearse for something it doesn't yet have a word for. The night winds down slowly. Satyrs collapse in heaps of laughter, their goat legs tangled. Maenads lie on the grass, still humming fragments of hymns. Even Dionysus himself seems quieter now, reclining under a tree, his ivy crown askew. You glance at him and swear he winks, just once, before closing his eyes. And as you drift, you realize you're not merely a guest at a divine party. You're witnessing the roots of storytelling in motion, where laughter and frenzy mingle to create something enduring. It's exhausting, yes, but it's also strangely soothing. Like watching fireflies dance, chaotic yet inevitable. The next time you find yourself moving along dusty roads with Dionysus and his ever-changing band of revelers, something new begins to settle in the air. It's not just the wine haze, though that's certainly still there. It's structure, like the first careful stitches on a loose cloth. You start to notice that the wild songs and chaotic dances are beginning to repeat. Not exactly word for word, but in a way that feels rehearsed. You lean back against a rough olive tree and realize with a sleepy smile, a stage is being born. Picture this: a village square at dusk. Torches are planted in a circle. Villagers gather in clusters, and the satyrs, always eager to hog the limelight, prance into the center. They start mimicking farmers, hunters, even each other, to the sound of laughter and clapping. Then a maenad cuts through with a wail, chanting lines about Dionysus's journeys, words you've heard before, but this time with a deliberate rhythm. The crowd quiets. You can feel it. They're leaning in. Here's the mainstream historical fact. The origins of Greek theater lie in these Dionysian rituals, where chorus and dance merged with storytelling. The quirky tidbit: one origin myth says that during early celebrations, goats were awarded as prizes to the best performers, hence the word tragedy, from tragoidia, meaning goat song. Imagine watching a heartfelt drama, tears streaming, and then the playwright proudly leading a bleeding goat off stage. Historians still argue whether these goat prizes were symbolic sacrifices or just practical livestock rewards. Either way, it gives the word tragic ending a much sillier picture. You squint at the scene before you. At first glance, it's still a drunken party. But listen closely. The chants of the chorus aren't random. They're telling the same myth again and again, polishing it like a stone in a river. Each retelling adds a flourish. A louder drumbeat here, a more dramatic gesture there. The performance evolves before your eyes, shaping into something recognizable. You drift toward the crowd, sitting among villagers whose expressions shift from amusement to awe. One woman wipes a tear during a hymn about Dionysus's suffering, while a man laughs loudly as satyrs bumble through slapstick routines. You realize they're experiencing more than ritual. They're being moved, pulled emotionally into the story. That's theater's secret seed, sprouting right here. But not everyone is on board. A stern-faced elder mutters about wasted time and broken traditions. He glares at the young performers as if they've committed a crime. And maybe, from his perspective, they have. Ritual is supposed to honor the god, not entertain mortals. You overhear someone whisper, "This is dangerous. If we forget worship in our laughter, Dionysus will punish us." Historians still argue whether early theater was seen as piety or as dangerous blasphemy. You tilt your head and wonder, aren't both possible at once? The stage itself is nothing but open dirt, but the atmosphere is unmistakably theatrical. People arrange themselves into semicircles. Performers step deliberately into a central space. Even the pauses begin to matter. A satyr freezes mid-gesture, waits just long enough, then delivers a body punchline, and the crowd erupts. Timing has been invented. You find yourself giggling when one goat in the background starts bleeding right in the middle of a dramatic chant. A satyr rolls his eyes and shouts, "Even the goat wants a roll." The crowd roars, and you realize that animals, vendors, and spectators are all part of this messy experiment. It's not polished, but it's alive. The night deepens, and as torches sputter, the chorus gathers for one final hymn. This time, the villagers sway with them, their voices rising together in harmony. It's haunting, less chaotic, more collective. You feel goosebumps crawl down your arms as the chorus tells of Dionysus wandering, rejected, and triumphant. It's a story everyone knows, yet tonight it feels sharper. clearer, almost scripted. And here's the joke you whisper to yourself. You've just watched theater stumble onto its first rehearsal, and not one person in the audience will ever think of it as art. To them, it's worship. To you, it's the sleepy origin of stages everywhere. By the time the torches burn low and the crowd disperses, the air feels different. You glance back at the dirt circle, littered with footprints, grapeskins, and one very confused goat. It looks ordinary, but you know better. That circle is a seed, and one day it will grow into marble theaters carved into hillsides. You yawn, realizing that for all the chaos, something ordered is being born. Theater is coming to life, and you were there for its first clumsy breath. By now, the open dirt circles and chanting choruses are no longer enough. You sense it as you follow the Dionysian crowd into another village square. The performance is starting to itch for something more. People are tired of seeing the same faces night after night, the same satyr grins, the same farmer in the same robe pretending to be a god. They crave variation, surprise, something to separate the actor from the villager, the role from the ordinary. And that's when masks and disguises make their grand, slightly clumsy entrance. At first, it's improvised. Someone smears soot across their cheeks. Someone else ties a strip of bark across their face, cutting 2 uneven eye holes. The crowd giggles, pointing, whispering, "He looks like my cousin after a bad haircut." But then the laughter softens. With that crude disguise, the villager stops being himself. He becomes a character. You lean forward, realizing you're watching the invention of theatrical persona, someone stepping into a role bigger than their own skin. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Greek theater developed iconic masks, crafted from linen and plaster, painted with exaggerated expressions to project emotion even to the back rows. The quirky tidbit. Some vase paintings suggest these masks were stored in sacred temples when not in use, as if they themselves were holy objects. Imagine treating a giant papier-mâché sad face like a relic. Careful, don't drop the holy frown. Historians still argue whether early masks began as practical tools for performance or as religious objects that actors dared to wear only during festivals. You watch the villagers fumble through their first attempts. One man dons a mask with bulging eyes painted crudely in black. He steps into the circle, recites a hymn, and suddenly the crowd gasps. Not because the lines are new, but because the mask distances him. He's no longer just Nico the shoemaker, he's a vessel for myth. Nearby, another performer tries the opposite approach. No mask, but layers of costume. He wraps himself in ivy, drapes a goat hide over his shoulders, and waddles clumsily into the center. The children burst out laughing at his over-the-top goat bleats, but you sense something deeper. The act of costume lets him exaggerate reality, turning daily life into parody. You whisper to yourself, "Congratulations, you've just invented cosplay. 2,000 years early." The masks grow bolder as the evening progresses. Someone paints a huge grin with bright red pigment. Another crafts an elongated nose that wiggles when he speaks. The crowd responds, sometimes laughing, sometimes shivering. You realize masks don't just hide, they amplify. They take the emotions swirling in the ritual and distill them into visible symbols. There's a small moment that makes you chuckle. A performer in a tragic mask trips over his robe, face planting into the dirt. The mask, still grinning broadly, looks up at the crowd as he groans. The audience erupts with laughter, unable to decide whether the accident is part of the act. And perhaps that's the beauty. When you wear a mask, accidents become performance. Scholarly voices echo in your head again. Some argue masks allowed actors to embody gods without offending them, creating distance between mortal and divine. Others claim masks were simply practical, helping project emotion in large, echoing spaces. Historians still argue whether the mask was born from piety or practicality. Sitting here, you suspect both. You notice, too, how masks invite the audience into complicity. Villagers begin whispering, nudging one another. Who is that? Is it him? The anonymity shifts focus away from the performer's identity and onto the role itself. The first stirrings of character are here, bubbling under the surface. As night falls, the chorus gathers, now wearing identical, simpler masks, just blank white faces with hollow eyes. They chant in unison, and the effect is eerie. You shiver, not from fear, but from the realization that the crowd itself has changed. They're no longer watching individuals, they're watching archetypes, symbols, shadows larger than life. One more tidbit sneaks its way into your memory. Some ancient sources claim masks muffled the actor's voice, making projection harder, not easier. Imagine that, actors trying to deliver lines in giant, sound-swallowing helmets while villagers in the back mutter, "What did he say? Something about goats?" And yet, despite the flaws the masks endure, refining themselves over centuries. By the end of the night, you see performers hanging their masks carefully on tree branches, as if tucking away part of themselves until the next festival. The torches burn low, casting long shadows across the blank, painted faces. They look strange, eerie, yet oddly comforting, like silent companions keeping watch. You yawn, letting your eyes close for a moment. The world around you blurs, but one thought lingers. With every mask slipped on, with every robe draped across a shoulder, the villagers take one step closer to theater as we know it. What began as wine-soaked frenzy now wears a painted face, ready to stare back at the audience across centuries. You wake to the hum of another gathering, this time not in a village square but on a rocky slope. The crowd has outgrown the flat, cramped dirt circles. Too many sandals shuffle, too many voices echo. Someone shouts, "We can't all see." Another complains, "We can't all hear." And just like that, necessity nudges invention again. You follow the villagers as they climb a hillside, arranging themselves in a rough semicircle around the performers. Without realizing it, you're witnessing the invention of the amphitheater, born not from grand architectural plans, but from the simple logic of gravity and a good view. The slope cradles the sound. Voices ring clearer, chants carry farther. You close your eyes and notice it. The earth itself is doing the acoustics. Later, this will become a defining trait of Greek theater. Stone tiers carved into hillsides, each step a resonant chamber. But here it's just villagers stumbling into an accidental masterpiece of design. Mainstream historical fact. The famous Theater of Epidaurus, built centuries later, still boasts acoustics so perfect you can hear a coin drop on stage from the highest seat. Quirky tidbit. Some archaeologists think goat sacrifices left fat on the stones, which might have subtly altered the sound reflections. Imagine that. Your surround sound system powered by sacrificial barbecue. As you settle into the hillside with the others, Dionysus's influence feels stronger. Ivy garlands dangle from wooden posts. The smell of wine-soaked bread drifts across the crowd. A makeshift altar sits near the playing space, reminding everyone this is still half religion, half entertainment. The actors shuffle nervously, aware that every word, every stumble will echo louder now. The chorus enters, masked and unified, their feet stamping in rhythm. The sound rises, multiplied by the slope, and you can feel it in your chest. You glance around at the wide-eyed villagers. This is bigger than ritual now. It's a spectacle. You mutter to yourself, "Congratulations, you've just invented stadium seating. Netflix binge to follow in about 2 millennia. But of course, this isn't just about convenience. There's symbolism here. High above the performers, the gods are imagined to sit, looking down. The audience becomes a kind of extension of Olympus, witnessing mortals pretend to be divine. Historians still argue whether these hillside gatherings were deliberately designed as sacred imitations of Olympus, or whether people just liked a good slope with a view. Either way, it works. The performance begins. A masked actor steps forward, his voice booming unnaturally loud. He lifts his arms, invoking Dionysus, and the crowd gasps. For the first time, the performer is framed not just by masks or costumes, but by space itself. The hillside creates an arena where the actor becomes monumental, larger than life, etched against the sky. You notice a new development: the separation of audience and stage. Before, villagers mingled freely, sometimes even joining in. Now, seated in their rows, they become watchers, not participants. It's the birth of spectatorship, and with that comes something unexpected: criticism. Someone mutters, "He forgot his line." Another whispers, "The chorus is too loud." You chuckle softly. Even here in the cradle of theater, humans are already heckling. As dusk falls, torches are placed strategically, casting performers in flickering halos. Shadows stretch up the hillside, dancing with the rhythm of the chants. It's both eerie and mesmerizing, the boundary between sacred ritual and art blurring once more. Then comes the quirky moment. One villager at the back decides he's too far away to see. He stands, cups his hands to his mouth, and shouts his own commentary, mimicking the actors. The crowd around him erupts with laughter. You realize you've just witnessed the first proto-parody, someone in the cheap seats turning bad visibility into comedy. Humanity, it seems, can't resist a roast. Night deepens. The amphitheater, if you can call it that, feels alive, breathing with the voices of chorus, audience, and hillside together. You think back to the earlier flat circles and realize something profound. Space shapes story. The slope doesn't just improve sound, it transforms meaning. Performances now have scale, depth, and hierarchy. Historians still argue whether these early hillside gatherings directly inspired the massive stone theaters, or whether later architects simply formalized an already obvious idea. But sitting here, grass pricking your ankles, you can almost hear the blueprint being written in the air. As the final hymn ends, the villagers descend the hill, torches bobbing like fireflies. The slope lies quiet again, but you know it will be used and reused and eventually carved into something enduring. You linger a moment longer, staring up at the stars above the empty stage, thinking how perfectly they align. Actors below, audience midway, cosmos above. A natural amphitheater, scripted by the gods themselves. You yawn, shifting your weight, letting your head rest against your arm. Sleep tugs at you, but the story presses on. Theater has masks now, and stages that curve with the earth. What it doesn't have yet is that peculiar urge to tell tragedy, comedy, and everything in between. But don't worry, you'll get there soon enough. Morning again, and you find yourself walking the familiar dusty path, sandals scraping against loose stones. But today, something feels different. The villagers you trail are not simply trudging toward another hillside gathering. They're carrying chisels, hammers, and long planks of timber. Their arms ache from hauling baskets of stone. The slope that once served as an impromptu stage is about to get a makeover. You're standing at the edge of an architectural experiment, the birth of the stone theater. At first glance, it looks like a jumble of rocks and stubborn villagers, but gradually the slope is carved into stepped rows, each one wider and flatter than the last. Stone replaces grass. Permanence replaces improvisation. You watch a boy drop a hammer, muttering about sore hands, and you realize this is labor, not just ritual. And yet, the gods are in the details. Every strike of the chisel feels like an offering to Dionysus, the patron of both chaos and creativity. Here is your mainstream historical fact. The Greeks perfected this design into masterpieces like the Theater of Epidaurus and the Theater of Dionysus in Athens, where thousands could gather in near-perfect acoustics. And the quirky tidbit. Some early builders apparently embedded bronze jars under the seats to help carry sound upward. That's right, you're basically sitting in the ancient equivalent of a surround sound system, courtesy of a few upside-down pots. You settle yourself on a half-finished stone bench. The surface is rough, but it's steady. Around you, villagers joke, sweat, and argue about alignment. Someone insists the rows should curve more, another demands they remain straight. Historians still argue whether the earliest theaters were semicircles by design, or whether they simply bent naturally around the contours of a hill. As with many things in Greek history, the truth is probably a little of both. By dusk, the rough semicircle is complete enough for testing. Torches are lit, and a chorus gathers at the base. When their voices rise, the sound travels like never before, bouncing off the carved stone, climbing effortlessly toward the highest seats. You close your eyes, marveling at how something so simple as cutting steps into rock has transformed the experience. You whisper, "Eat your heart out, Dolby Digital." The performance begins, and for the first time you sense a new kind of order. People sit in designated rows, no more shoving for position. The wealthy and important settle into the best seats near the front, while farmers and latecomers climb higher. Theater has created its own social map. You glance around, smirking at how this mirrors our modern obsession with premium seating. Some things never change. As the actors don masks and step forward, you notice how the backdrop has also shifted. Wooden posts hold simple cloths painted with symbols. Vines for Dionysus, waves for Poseidon, thunderbolts for Zeus. It's not yet scenery as we know it, but it's a start. The villagers sigh in appreciation, the audience leaning into the illusion. And here's your quirky, sleepy smile. One cloth painting is crooked, and for the rest of the night, the thunderbolt looks like Zeus is hurling a bent spoon instead of divine wrath. The amphitheater fills with more than sound. It fills with community. People share food during intermissions. Olives, bread dipped in oil, and the inevitable wine. Children run between the rows, chased half-heartedly by parents who can't quite bring themselves to leave the story. You catch a whiff of roasted goat, and your stomach rumbles. Yes, the festival is still religious at heart, but it's also becoming a day out. Entertainment, feasting, a bit of gossip. One villager leans over to whisper, "I only came because my neighbor is performing." You grin. Even in the 5th century BCE, supporting friends' side projects was an obligation. Then comes a moment of pure magic. A lead actor steps forward, raising his mask skyward. The torches flicker, shadows dance, and his voice echoes so perfectly that for a second, you're convinced you're hearing two people speak instead of one. The hillside murmurs with awe. The actor bows, the crowd cheers. You can almost see the idea of star power twinkling into existence. As the night deepens, the performance stumbles, literally. One chorus member trips on a step, sliding awkwardly down into the orchestra space. The crowd bursts into laughter, and the poor performer waves sheepishly. You chuckle along, realizing you've just witnessed the accidental invention of slapstick comedy. The actor might be mortified, but the audience is delighted. And isn't that, in some way, the true spirit of Dionysus? Chaos, humor, and community all blended into one ridiculous tumble. When the performance finally ends, the audience disperses slowly. The hillside glows faintly under the moon, stone steps gleaming with new permanence. You linger for a moment, running your hand along the cool, rough edges of freshly carved seats. This isn't just a space anymore. It's a monument to human creativity, one that will outlast every villager here. You yawn, feeling the stone beneath you hard and grounding, yet oddly comforting. The theater has taken its shape, and with it, your story shifts too. The stage is set, literally. And now the real playwrights are about to step onto the scene. The morning light drapes lazily over the stone benches, and you find yourself wandering into the half-finished theater again. This time, however, the air carries not the smell of chisels and dust, but parchment and ink. A handful of men sit cross-legged near the orchestra, arguing in hushed tones while waving rolled papyri. These are not stonemasons or priests. They are poets, soon to be playwrights, who will take Dionysus' chaotic rituals and shape them into the art of drama. One of them, a tall man with a stern brow, mutters about needing fewer goats in the chorus. Another insists the goats are essential. It's literally called a tragoidia, a goat song. You smile, amused, as the word tragedy takes root before your eyes. Mainstream historical fact. Aeschylus, one of the earliest tragedians, is credited with adding a second actor to the stage, shifting performances from simple choruses into complex dialogues. Quirky tidbit. Legend says he came up with many of his ideas after falling asleep in a vineyard and dreaming that Dionysus whispered plot twists into his ear. Historians still argue whether that's divine inspiration or just too much wine under the hot sun. As the poets rehearse, you notice how they turn myth into narrative. One reads aloud a fragment of a play about Prometheus. Another scribbles furiously about a love affair gone wrong. You lean closer, catching the cadence of the words. They're structured, rhythmic, almost musical. You realize these aren't just stories. They're carefully engineered lullabies of logic and rhythm. Even tragedy has a strange calm to it. The chorus begins practicing under a poet's instruction, chanting in unison. Their voices rise, fall, echo across the stone. At first it sounds like worship, then like storytelling, and finally like something new altogether, performance. The villagers watch with wide eyes, some confused, some enchanted. You can practically feel the gears of culture turning. The leap from ritual to theater is small but irreversible. One poet paces, fretting aloud about props. Should they use a spear? A lyre? A loaf of bread? Another shakes his head. Too distracting. You smirk at the timelessness of backstage squabbles. Someone, somewhere, is always panicking about props. A goat wanders too close, nibbling at a parchment scroll, and you chuckle. Clearly, this one is auditioning for the role of Best Supporting Animal. As rehearsals continue, the structure of plays begins to emerge. A prologue sets the stage. The chorus fills in the backstory. Actors trade lines with growing intensity. It's all strangely familiar. You whisper to yourself, "Congratulations! You've just invented binge-worthy drama, complete with plot twists." The audience files in that evening, curious about what the poets have cooked up. The first play begins, and suddenly you're immersed in something richer than ritual. Characters debate, gods intervene, fate looms overhead like storm clouds. You notice that the villagers lean forward, gripped by the tension. They laugh when the chorus inserts a witty line, sigh when a character stumbles toward doom. For the first time, you realize people aren't just watching, they're emotionally invested. Your mind drifts to the quirky realities behind the art. Some plays are so experimental that audiences boo them off the stage. Others spark fistfights over interpretations. One poet, exasperated by the noise, mutters that he wishes Dionysus would invent an audience curtain as well as a stage curtain. You grin, filing that away for later. Dionysus may be taking notes. The performance swells to its climax. A character cries out against the gods, thunder rumbles faintly in the distance, and the audience collectively gasps. The atmosphere is electric. Yet you know the ending will not bring comfort. It's tragedy, after all. And when the hero falls, the chorus chants mournfully, the audience wipes tears, and you hear the first whispers of catharsis, the cleansing of emotion through art. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly sought catharsis, or whether that's a later philosophical overlay, but here, in the dim light, it feels undeniable. Afterward, as the poets gather their notes, you overhear their banter. One laughs about how the goat nearly stole the show. Another boasts that his line about Zeus's thunderbolt got the biggest laugh. A third simply sighs, already rewriting scenes in his head. You chuckle softly. Theater folk have always been like this. Equal parts insecure, proud, and exhausted. The villagers drift home, voices buzzing about the evening. They repeat favorite lines, argue about the ending, gossip about who cried hardest. Theater has become more than a ritual. It's now a shared cultural experience, something to talk about long after the torches are snuffed. You lean back on the cool stone, staring at the night sky above the stage. The myths are alive now, reshaped by human hands into plays that will echo for centuries. You feel the weight of it. You've just sat through the first seeds of Sophocles and Euripides, of Aristophanes' biting comedies, of the countless playwrights yet to come. And though the curtain is still missing, the drama is very much alive. You yawn, shifting on the stone bench, lulled by the echo of the chorus fading into the night. Theater is no longer just ritual. It has become story. And the stage, though simple, has become a place where gods and mortals meet in carefully rehearsed lines. Dionysus must be grinning somewhere in the shadows, knowing his chaotic parties have just been transformed into art. You shuffle into the theater on yet another sun-drenched morning, your sandals kicking up pale dust. At first, it feels like any other gathering, but then you notice the crowd. Bigger, louder, hungrier. There are vendors at the entrances now, hawking figs, olives, and hunks of roasted goat. A boy with a jug of watered wine pushes past you, nearly spilling half of it on your tunic. The performances have grown, but so have the distractions. You wedge yourself onto a stone bench and immediately regret it. Someone behind you is loudly unwrapping bread that crackles like thunder. Another audience member waves for friends who are still climbing the hill, shouting greetings mid-scene. And just as the chorus begins, a goat bleats loudly in the distance, refusing to be ignored. You mutter under your breath. This is why Netflix invented the skip intro button. The actors, masked and poised, struggle to compete. Voices carry, but so does gossip. One group of women in the upper seats chat openly about who wore the better wreath of ivy. The play drowns under the tide of everyday life. You sigh. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Athenian theaters held thousands, and crowd control was a genuine challenge, often requiring magistrates to police the aisles. Quirky tidbit. Some records suggest food fights occasionally broke out when spectators grew bored. You imagine olives flying like slingstones, and you chuckle at the absurdity. Historians still argue whether these unruly behaviors were common or exaggerated anecdotes from cranky elites. But here, surrounded by chatter and crumbs, it feels all too real. On stage, the actors press on. A performer raises his mask toward the sky, delivering lines of sorrow. Yet, from the back row, someone sneezes with such force that the audience erupts in laughter, breaking the solemn mood. The actor freezes, then sighs audibly through his mask, waiting for the giggles to subside. You whisper, and thus, the first broken fourth wall. The chorus attempts to draw focus back with rhythmic stomping. Their sandals pound the dirt, echoing against the stone seats. But even that rhythm is hijacked by vendors clinking cups as they pour more wine. One performer nearly trips on a discarded fig. You watch, equal parts amused and sympathetic. This isn't just art, it's survival. And yet, there's something strangely comforting about the chaos. The theater is alive, messy, and communal. Unlike our modern, hushed concert halls, here people engage fully, even if it means loudly disagreeing mid-scene. You overhear a man declaring that the hero's downfall is ridiculous, while another insists the morale is profound. Two neighbors argue heatedly until one offers bread as a peace treaty. You smirk. Humanity never changes. We've always debated art like it was politics. As the play drags into a particularly heavy monologue, a small child escapes his mother's grasp and runs gleefully toward the orchestra. He stomps around, imitating the chorus until he's scooped up by an embarrassed parent. The crowd roars with laughter, briefly more entertained by the child than the script. You chuckle softly. Kids, after all, are timeless scene stealers. But beneath the noise, you sense a new tension. The actors and poets want more control, more focus, more reverence for the story. The distractions are beginning to clash with the rising ambition of the art form. The theater is no longer just a party. It is trying to become something higher, something lasting. The gap between performers and audience grows wider. As dusk settles, the chaos calms slightly. Torches flicker and shadows stretch over the stone. For a few moments, silence reigns, and the actors seize it. A line about fate and mortality cuts through the air, raw and resonant. The audience, caught off guard, falls quiet. You feel it in your chest. The spell of theater, fragile but powerful, holding everyone captive if only for a breath. And then, inevitably, someone drops a wineskin with a wet thud, and the magic shatters. You groan, covering your eyes. Somewhere, Dionysus chuckles. He thrives on this balance of order and chaos. Maybe he likes the interruptions. Maybe he sees them as part of the performance itself. Historians still argue whether the festivals of Dionysus were meant to be reverent rituals or joyous free-for-alls. Judging by the goat bleating loudly at the edge of the orchestra, you're leaning toward the latter. By the time the play ends, you are exhausted, not from the performance but from the sheer energy of the crowd. Vendors pack up, children sleep on their parents' shoulders, and the stone benches empty slowly. You remain for a moment, staring at the discarded crumbs and trampled wreaths, realizing how much noise is part of life, part of history, and part of theater itself. You yawn, letting your head tilt back against the stone. The distractions may frustrate the actors, but they also make the theater real. Without goats bleating, wine spilling, and audiences heckling, the plays might feel too distant, too stiff. Perhaps this is exactly what Dionysus wanted. Performance that's never fully in control, always teetering between the sacred and the absurd. The next morning, the theater feels different. The stone seats are still warm from the sun, and the air carries a faint scent of wine and crushed olives. But there's a new presence among the villagers, something intangible yet unmistakable. It's the awareness of craft. Yesterday was chaos. Today, the actors, poets, and chorus begin to experiment with pacing, gestures, and voice projection. You feel a sense of deliberate refinement settling over the hillside, like watching a child finally figure out how to balance on a seesaw. The lead actor steps forward, mask in place, and begins speaking slowly, enunciating each word. You notice that the villagers lean in, listening more intently than they did before. The chorus responds in kind, moving in perfect synchrony with the actor's pauses. Mainstream historical fact. The structured dialogue between actors and chorus became a hallmark of classical Greek theater, allowing complex narratives to emerge. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient actors reportedly used reeds in their mouths to amplify certain vowel sounds, unintentionally producing a squeaky, bird-like effect. Historians still argue whether these tools were widespread or experimental curiosities, but the result must have sounded unforgettable. You watch a satyr character attempt a comedic interlude. He flails wildly, his oversized mask slipping slightly, and the audience laughs. You catch a glimmer of understanding. The balance between tragedy and comedy is being discovered. Even in solemn moments, there's room for mischief. You grin. The first slapstick is alive and well on the amphitheater stage. Nearby, poets whisper, pointing to notes and adjusting lines. One murmurs, "We need fewer repetitions in the chorus." Another counters, "The repetition is what holds the rhythm of the story." You recognize a timeless debate, economy versus ornamentation. The tension between clarity and ceremony, brevity and spectacle, is already shaping theater's evolution. As the sun dips lower, the performers experiment with entrances and exits. One actor, stepping through a narrow side path, trips on a hidden stone. The audience erupts into laughter, not mockery, but delight. You lean back and think. Theater is learning from accidents, embracing imperfection. Every stumble teaches rhythm, timing, and audience patience. The chorus gathers at the orchestra for a song about Dionysus's wanderings. Their voices rise, overlapping in complex harmony. You feel it physically, as if the sound vibrates through the stone into your chest. The villagers watch, entranced, some closing their eyes, others swaying. It's mesmerizing, hypnotic, the art of performance beginning to command attention without coercion. One of the poets adds a small touch, a line about a falling star, slightly off topic, but it captures the imagination. The crowd murmurs appreciatively. You chuckle softly. Theater is learning subtlety. Even when improvisation sneaks in, it enhances the story rather than derails it. The day stretches on with practice. Masks are adjusted, lines refined, and timing calibrated. You notice the audience, now more familiar, observing with expectation. They respond to gestures, pause at beats, and laugh at cues they've learned. The performance is evolving into a shared language between actor and spectator. Then comes a peculiar, sleepy moment. A young boy, perched on the edge of a stone bench, dozes off mid-applause, only to wake with a start at the final gesture of the chorus. You laugh quietly. These are the first sleepy theater-goers, and somehow they're perfect for the scene. As night falls, torches flicker, shadows lengthen, and the first murmurs of the audience begin shaping reactions. Actors and chorus respond in turn, adjusting volume, expression, and gestures. You realize you're watching the birth of dynamic performance, where the audience is no longer passive. They influence, guide, and complete the story. Historians still argue whether audience participation in Greek theater was intentional or incidental, but here it feels alive, intuitive, and utterly human. You stretch, letting the stone seat cradle your tired limbs. The theater has moved from chaos to craft, from ritual to rehearsal, and yet the spirit of Dionysus, wild, unpredictable, indulgent, lingers, reminding everyone that perfection is not the goal. Enchantment is. The morning arrives cool and quiet, and you return to the amphitheater, feeling a soft wind brush across your face. The stage seems calmer today, but there's an energy in the performers, movements that wasn't there before, a confidence born of practice and repetition. The chorus lines up, masks gleaming faintly in the early sun, while the lead actor adjusts his robes and checks his mask. You realize this is the first real sense of professionalism creeping into Greek theater. You settle onto a stone bench, the surface cool and smooth beneath your hand. Around you, villagers arrive slowly, carrying baskets of figs and water, murmuring greetings and stretching their legs. The theater has begun to demand ritual from the audience too, mainstream historical fact. By the 5th century BCE, festival-goers were accustomed to hours-long performances, attending multiple plays in sequence. Quirky tidbit. Some early spectators supposedly brought cushions or folded cloaks to sit more comfortably, inventing the ancient version of theater amenities. Historians still argue whether this was common across all theaters or just a few wealthy cities indulging their audiences, but you notice the concept of comfort emerging, however crudely. The actors step forward, and the first lines of a newly written tragedy ring across the stone. The words are deliberate, careful, but the chorus adds a touch of unpredictability, echoing past rituals. You see how each gesture has been honed. Hands raised precisely, steps timed to avoid collisions, voices modulated for maximum clarity. The chaos of early performances has given way to a rhythm both comforting and mesmerizing. Suddenly, a goat wanders into the orchestra space munching on a fallen piece of bread. The actor pauses mid-monologue, stares down the animal, and continues speaking as though nothing happened. The crowd bursts into gentle laughter. You smirk. Dionysus' influence is still present, even in this polished scene. A poet whispers corrections to the lead actor, reminding him to pause just slightly after a dramatic line. You lean forward, noticing how small adjustments change the audience's reactions entirely. A sigh, a gasp, a murmur of appreciation. Every nuance now matters. The early improvisation of chaotic festivals has been replaced by subtle orchestration, yet the magic feels intact. Nearby, a group of children tiptoe along the back row, trying not to disturb the solemn moments. One drops a pebble, and the sound ricochets across the stone, drawing surprised laughter. You chuckle quietly. Even now, theater accommodates spontaneity, absorbing accidents into performance, teaching everyone patience and adaptability. As the day wears on, the actors experiment with emotion. A character weeps bitterly, then laughs nervously, testing the audience's reaction. You notice how masks amplify these feelings. A frown etched in plaster communicates more than words could. The performers are learning the subtle art of exaggeration, of balancing realism with theatricality. Historians still argue whether Greek masks were designed primarily for visibility or dramatic effect, but here the distinction feels unimportant. The masks do their job beautifully. The chorus interjects with a song, each line carefully woven into the unfolding story. Their synchronized steps create a rhythm that pulls the audience in, guiding attention without overt command. You feel your own chest rise and fall with their cadence, lulled into the gentle ebb and flow of story and music. As evening falls, torches flicker along the upper tiers. Shadows stretch across stone, elongating gestures and exaggerating masks. The audience leans in, caught between awe and amusement. You notice a couple of young women whispering plot predictions, while an older man scratches his chin, clearly pondering philosophical implications. Even in this refined setting, theater has become a place for shared thought, reflection, and dialogue. Finally, the performance ends. Silence lingers, then applause rises in waves. The actors bow, masks tilted slightly, and the audience begins to drift home, their faces bright with excitement. You remain seated, letting the echoes of voices and laughter settle in your mind. You realize that in these early refinements, theater has become a bridge between chaos and order, performer and audience, myth and human experience. You yawn softly, feeling the weight of the day in your limbs. The amphitheater now hums with quiet life, the memory of sound lingering, waiting for tomorrow's performance. Dionysus would be proud. The next day dawns warm and golden, and you wander up the familiar path to the amphitheater, carrying a quiet sense of anticipation. The stone benches are bathed in sunlight, casting gentle shadows across the carved steps. You notice the actors moving with more confidence than ever. Their gestures are fluid, rehearsed yet not rigid. Something new hums in the air. The sense that theater is becoming not just entertainment, but an institution. A place where stories live, breathe, and evolve over time. The chorus practices a new song, their footsteps in sync with their rhythm, creating a hypnotic cadence that pulls you deeper into the moment. Mainstream historical fact: Greek tragedies often relied on choruses to narrate and comment on the action, guiding audience interpretation and emotional response. Quirky tidbit: some choruses reportedly wore bells on their ankles to add subtle percussion, a precursor to sound design that would not be officially recognized for centuries. Historians still argue whether these bells were for musicality, ritual significance, or simply theatrical flair, but you can't help smiling at the image of jingling actors enhancing drama. The actors rehearse a dialogue-heavy scene today. You notice the interplay between movement and speech. Timing is everything. One misstep, and the cadence of the story falters. The lead actor gestures grandly with his mask slightly tilted. A murmur runs through the crowd, partly awe, partly amusement. You lean back, feeling the rhythm of storytelling seep into your bones. Nearby, a vendor drops a basket of figs, scattering them across the stone floor. The audience reacts instantly. Children giggle, a man shouts, "More fruit for the heroes!" And the performers pause just long enough to acknowledge the interruption with a bow. You realize this is theater absorbing life in all its messy glory, chaos woven seamlessly into performance. The poets wander among the chorus and actors, offering subtle corrections and suggestions. One whispers, "Pause longer before the revelation." Another shakes his head, muttering about vocal projection. You watch as even minor adjustments reshape audience perception, making the story sharper, richer, more immersive. As the afternoon drifts on, a gentle wind sweeps through the amphitheater. You inhale, savoring the scent of crushed leaves, wine, and sun-baked stone. The chorus practices a particularly intricate passage, their voices rising and falling like waves. You feel almost hypnotized, lulled by the repetition and harmony. The rhythm is soothing, grounding, perfectly aligned with the kind of slow, sleepy immersion Dionysus would approve of. One actor improvises a small comedic gesture, a subtle twitch of the mask, eyebrows, and the audience responds with laughter, delighting in the unexpected. You lean in, noticing the delicate balance between rehearsed drama and spontaneous amusement. It's here that the magic lives. Predictability keeps the story coherent, but surprise keeps it alive. The day deepens into evening, and the golden light softens to amber. Torches are lit, casting flickering shadows that dance across masks and costumes. The audience settles into a hushed anticipation. Even in this growing formalization, the amphitheater retains a sense of intimacy. You can see every expression reflected in painted masks, every subtle motion magnified by the stone steps. Historians still argue whether the early Greek audiences attended primarily for education, worship, or leisure. But sitting here, you understand it's all three. Theater has become a communal experience, a ritual that entertains, instructs, and captivates simultaneously. As the chorus concludes its final song and the actors bow, you sit quietly for a moment, letting the vibrations of sound and emotion fade into memory. The theater, once a chaotic dirt circle, now stands as a testament to human creativity, ritual, and the gentle, enduring power of storytelling. You yawn, feeling the day's warmth and the slow pull of sleep. The morning greets you with a soft haze, and you find yourself ascending the familiar hillside path once more. The amphitheater seems to exhale under the early sun, stone seats glowing faintly with warmth. Today, there is a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a mixture of anticipation and experimentation. Actors stretch their arms, adjust masks, and murmur lines under their breath. The stage is no longer a simple platform. It's becoming a laboratory for performance, an arena where both story and spectacle are tested. You settle into your favorite stone bench, feeling the familiar rough texture beneath your palms. Villagers trickle in, some carrying jars of water, others clutching scraps of bread. You notice families spreading out, establishing small territories, as though they've adopted the theater as their personal sanctuary. Mainstream historical fact. By the height of classical Greek theater, festivals could attract thousands, with audience members spending entire days in attendance. Quirky tidbit. Some attendees reportedly brought folding stools or cushions, early attempts to preserve comfort on hard stone, while others applied crushed herbs to mask the scent of crowded bodies. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or limited to wealthier citizens, but you smile at the image of herbs wafting over a raucous crowd. The actors begin with a scene full of tension and whispered secrets. You notice how timing and gesture have become almost ritualized. One performer pauses too long, and the audience murmurs. Another speeds through a line, prompting gentle laughter. You realize the interplay between performers and spectators is now a carefully calibrated dance, though it still allows room for human unpredictability. A chorus member exaggerates a movement, arms sweeping the air dramatically, and a nearby goat bleats, startled by the motion. The crowd erupts in a mixture of amusement and applause. You lean back, smiling at the unexpected comedy interwoven with tragedy. The balance of chaos and order, you note, remains at the heart of theater. Poets move among the actors, making subtle notations and whispering instructions. One suggests a softer tone for a particularly emotional line. Another urges a sharper, more rhythmic chant from the chorus. You catch yourself marveling at how tiny refinements can transform the audience's experience, proving that theater is as much about nuance as it is about spectacle. As the sun climbs higher, the scene shifts to a gentle, reflective passage. The chorus sings a hymn to Dionysus, the cadence slow and soothing. You feel yourself swaying slightly to the rhythm, caught between wakefulness and drowsiness. Even as you note the historical significance of these rehearsals, your mind drifts pleasantly into the sensory world of music, movement, and ritual. Nearby, a young child dozes against a parent's knee, waking only occasionally to giggle at the actor's exaggerated gestures. You notice how audience reactions, from laughter to sighs, influence the performance itself. It's a feedback loop centuries in the making, creating a living dialogue between storyteller and listener. By evening, shadows stretch across the amphitheater. Torches flicker along the upper tiers, casting long, gentle shapes over the stone. The audience leans in, anticipating both story and spectacle. The performers, finely attuned, deliver lines that evoke awe, humor, and gentle suspense. Even in this early stage of professionalization, theater has become a conduit for emotion, intellect, and community. Historians still argue whether Greek theater evolved primarily for religious devotion or entertainment, but sitting here, you sense it serves both. As the performance draws to a close, the crowd begins to disperse quietly. You linger for a moment, letting the fading echoes of song and dialogue resonate through your chest. The amphitheater, carved from hillside and imagination alike, now embodies the union of ritual, art, and human curiosity. You yawn, feeling the slow tug of sleep as the day's rehearsals settle into memory. A gentle morning mist blankets the hillside, softening the edges of stone benches and scattering sunlight across the amphitheater. You walk up the familiar path, each step cushioned by dew-laden grass, feeling the lingering calm of early dawn. The air carries the faint aroma of bread, olives, and a hint of wine, a reminder that life in this valley continues alongside the art of theater. Today, the performers are experimenting with something new, the integration of props and stagecraft into their storytelling. You settle onto a stone bench, the surface slightly cool beneath your hands, and observe the preparations. A long wooden pole is dragged onto the orchestra space, and someone adjusts a canvas cloth painted with rough, abstract symbols representing forests and rivers. Mainstream historical fact: Greek theater gradually incorporated simple scenery, often painted panels or draped cloth, to suggest location or mood without overwhelming the imagination. Quirky tidbit: some early productions reportedly used real animals, goats, birds, even snakes, as live props, adding both spectacle and unpredictable comedy. Historians still argue whether these animals were common or rare, but you quietly imagine the chaos that would ensue if a goat decided to chase an actor mid-scene. The actors move carefully among the props, testing their use and refining gestures. You notice subtle shifts in how lines are delivered to accommodate the visual elements. A character pauses before a draped cloth, gesturing toward a painted vine. The audience leans forward slightly, drawn in by the suggestion of setting. You smile, realizing that these innovations are quietly transforming the storytelling experience, layering depth onto the ritual of narrative. The chorus practices nearby, stepping in precise formation to frame the scene. Their synchronized movements, once improvised, are now intentionally choreographed to guide attention and heighten emotion. You feel a subtle rhythm in your chest, mirroring the dance of voices and bodies. The interaction between chorus, actors, and props is creating a delicate balance: spectacle and story, chaos and control. Nearby, a poet whispers to the lead actor, suggesting an exaggerated gesture for emphasis. The actor nods, delivering the line with subtle flair, and the audience responds immediately. A murmur, a laugh, a gasp. You lean back, noting how small refinements, even a tilt of a mask or a flick of a wrist, dramatically alter the emotional impact of a scene. As the day drifts toward afternoon, rehearsals continue under the warm sun. Children play at the edges of the amphitheater, occasionally peeking through the chorus or knocking over a prop, eliciting laughter from both actors and spectators. You notice that this integration of daily life into performance is no longer disruptive. It has become part of the charm, a living thread weaving audience and art together. A minor mishap occurs. A painted backdrop flutters too violently in the wind, partially obscuring a character. The audience chuckles, the actor adjusts, and the scene continues seamlessly. You grin, realizing that theater is learning resilience, absorbing unpredictability, and turning it into creative opportunity. As the sun sets, golden light bathes the amphitheater, casting long shadows that stretch across the stone. Torches are lit along the upper tiers, flickering softly while the performers deliver their final lines. The audience sits entranced, eyes wide, hearts quiet, immersed in a story that is now richer, more dynamic, and subtly more sophisticated. Historians still argue whether these refinements were universally adopted or localized to certain festivals. But the evidence before you suggest the evolution of theater is both deliberate and organic. You sit back, breathing deeply, letting the warmth of the day, the lingering sense, and the distant murmur of applause settle in your body. The amphitheater has evolved into a vessel for expression, experimentation, and communal experience. Dionysus's chaotic spirit remains present, yet it now shares the stage with deliberate artistry and careful craftsmanship. You yawn softly, feeling the gentle tug of sleep as the day's activity fades into memory. The morning air is crisp and carries the faint fragrance of wildflowers and baked bread as you make your familiar climb to the amphitheater. Today, the theater feels alive in a way it never has before. An almost electric anticipation hums between stone, actors, and audience. Masks are polished, costumes adjusted, and the chorus practices its final movements for the season. There's a sense that this day, more than any other, marks a subtle transformation. Theater has moved fully from chaotic ritual into art tempered with human care. You settle on the cool stone benches, savoring the quiet moment before the performers arrive. Villagers gather slowly, some carrying small baskets of food, others arriving barefoot, murmuring greetings. You notice the familiarity of their movements, the rhythm of attendance, the unspoken choreography of settling in. Mainstream historical fact. By the classical period, theater festivals in Athens could last several days, with audiences often returning to multiple performances, fully immersed in the spectacle. Quirky tidbit. Some records suggest spectators would bring personal cushions or small folding stools, early comfort hacks that allowed them to endure marathon performances. Historians still argue whether such accommodations were common across social classes, but you can see the logic and ingenuity of it firsthand. The actors take the stage, masks catching the sunlight, their voices strong and practiced. Every gesture, every pause, has been carefully calibrated. The chorus responds in perfect unison, guiding the audience's focus and reinforcing narrative arcs. You feel a pulse of satisfaction. The improvisational chaos of early theater has transformed into deliberate, living storytelling. But the spontaneity, the chance for humor or accident, remains woven into the fabric of performance. A goat wanders into the orchestra yet again, much to your amusement, and the lead actor incorporates it seamlessly, eliciting laughter without breaking the scene. You lean back, appreciating the subtle artistry of adapting unpredictability into performance, a hallmark of theater from its earliest days. The performance unfolds with intricate emotion. Comedic moments arise alongside solemn tragedy, each beat carefully measured. The audience reacts collectively yet individually, their murmurs, laughter, and gasps forming a living accompaniment to the actor's art. You notice small details: a child mimicking chorus steps, an elderly man nodding knowingly, a young woman leaning forward at a dramatic pause. Theater has become a communal experience, shaping not only stories but the social fabric itself. As the sun begins to lower, casting long amber shadows across stone, the final scene draws to a quiet, graceful conclusion. The actors bow, masks tilted, robes fluttering, and the chorus chants a soft, lingering note. Applause rises and falls like gentle waves, mingling with laughter, whispers, and the occasional bleat from a goat wandering off stage. Dionysus's chaotic energy remains, now harmonized with disciplined artistry. You remain seated, letting the warmth of the stones, the fading light, and the echoing voices sink in. Theater, once a festival of unpredictability, now exists as a testament to human creativity, communal ritual, and the gentle, transformative power of story. You yawn softly, stretching against the smooth stone, letting the calm of the amphitheater wash over you. As night falls and torches flicker low, you sense the full cycle of this cultural evolution, from ritual to experiment to enduring art form. The gentle cadence of the chorus, the subtle movements of actors, and the quiet murmur of departing villagers lull you into a slow, dreamlike state. You feel the breath of centuries, the pulse of stories passed through masks and voices, a connection to countless audiences who sat exactly as you do now. The amphitheater, stones worn and shaped by time, cradles you in history's embrace. The chaos of Dionysus, the ingenuity of poets, and the laughter of countless spectators converge into a lullaby of human creativity. Word count, 1096. Wind down, 300 words. The amphitheater grows quiet now, shadows stretching long across every worn stone. You remain, your body pressed lightly against the cool surface, letting the day's sights and sounds drift gently from mind to memory. The chorus voice lingers, almost a whisper, a soft rhythm against the stillness of evening. You breathe in slowly, savoring the faint aroma of sun-baked clay, crushed herbs, and the distant hint of wine that lingers in the air. Every detail seems amplified, yet softened. Colors, scents, and textures fading like watercolors in a gentle rain. You reflect on the rhythm of life here. The interplay of actors, chorus, audience, and even goats, all weaving a narrative that is larger than any single performance. Each stumble, each improvised gesture, each soft murmur of delight or contemplation becomes part of a subtle pattern, like waves lapping quietly at a sunlit shore. Even the smallest detail, a mask tilted just so, a child's laughter, a murmured line, echoes, reverberating gently into your mind, forming a kind of lullaby built from story, ritual, and human imagination. The amphitheater, once chaotic and unpredictable, now rests in a state of quiet equilibrium. The stones are warm beneath you, the breeze gentle across your skin. You feel connected to countless spectators who came before and will come after, all breathing in the same stories, the same gentle rhythm of myth brought to life. The world feels expansive, yet intimately small, the divine and the human intertwined through performance, laughter, and shared experience. Allow your eyelids to grow heavy, your thoughts drifting like the chorus's final chant. The voices, the masks, the gentle chaos, they all blend into a soft, comforting hum. You are wrapped in the slow unfolding of history, lulled by the rhythm of performance and the